There's a death scene so brutal, Roman historians couldn't bring themselves to describe it in full detail. March 23rd, AD 59, the Bay of Naples. A woman swims desperately through dark waters, bleeding from her shoulder. Behind her, a murder ship sinks slowly into the Mediterranean Sea. Roman soldiers watch from the shore, torches flickering in the moonlight. Their orders are simple. The woman reaching the beach must not survive the night. This is the story of how Empress Agrippina the Younger, the most powerful woman in Roman history, was hunted down and brutally destroyed by the very empire she helped create. The empire, her own son, the Roman soldiers she once commanded. What you're about to discover isn't just a murder, it's the systematic annihilation of a woman who dared to rule Rome as an equal to any emperor. Born in a military camp on the Rhine in AD 15, Agrippina the Younger inherited the blood of Augustus himself. She was royalty in its purest form. Great-granddaughter of the first emperor, sister to Emperor Caligula, wife to Emperor Claudius, mother to Emperor Nero. 4 emperors, 1 woman's lifetime. But here's what they never tell you in history class. Agrippina didn't just stand beside these emperors, she manipulated them, controlled them, murdered them. By the age of 39, she had orchestrated the most audacious political coup in Roman history. She seduced her own uncle, Emperor Claudius, changed Rome's incest laws to marry him, then allegedly poisoned him with a plate of death-cap mushrooms. Her 16-year-old son Nero ascended the throne, and for the first time in history, coins were minted with a woman's face on the obverse, the side reserved for emperors. Imagine that moment, the Roman Senate watching in silent horror as Agrippina the Younger crowned her teenage son emperor. Not standing behind him, standing beside him, equal, powerful, untouchable. But power in Rome was a man's game, and Agrippina had broken every rule to seize it. Ancient historians described her with words dripping in venom. Ruthless, ambitious, domineering. They accused her of incest with her own son, dressing herself up in silk and perfume, appearing drunk at Nero's bedside at midday, ready to seduce him to maintain her control over the empire. The Roman author Cluvius documented passionate kisses between mother and son that implied wrongdoing. Tacitus wrote that she offered herself repeatedly to keep her grip on power. Were these accusations true? Or were they the desperate slanders of men who couldn't tolerate a woman wielding imperial authority? Here's what we know for certain. For 5 years, Agrippina ruled Rome. She attended Senate meetings. She sat on a throne beside her son during official ceremonies. Foreign ambassadors bowed to her. The Praetorian Guard swore loyalty to her. She even wrote and published her own autobiography, the only Roman woman to ever complete such an audacious public act. Then something shifted. Nero began to resent his mother's control. His advisors whispered poison in his ear. His mistress Poppaea demanded Agrippina's removal. The rumours of incest grew louder, more scandalous, more damaging. And Nero made a decision. His mother had to die. Not just die, she had to be erased, humiliated, destroyed so completely that no woman would ever dare claim imperial power again. What happened next involved 3 failed assassination attempts, a collapsing ceiling, poisoned wine, and a ship designed to sink and drown its passenger. But Agrippina survived them all. Until that night in March AD 59, when Roman soldiers finally surrounded her villa. What those soldiers did to Empress Agrippina the Younger in her final moments would become one of the darkest secrets of the Roman Empire. Let's rewind to understand how Rome's most powerful empress became Rome's most hunted woman. The evidence trail begins not with Nero's rage, but with Agrippina's calculated ascent to absolute power, a journey that left bodies in its wake. Documented in official records, Agrippina's path to the throne reads like a masterclass in political manipulation. When Emperor Claudius's third wife, Messalina, was executed in AD 48, the aging emperor needed a replacement. Agrippina saw her opportunity. But there was one insurmountable problem. She was Claudius's niece. Roman law strictly forbade marriage between uncle and niece. Such unions were considered incestuous, unthinkable, forbidden. Agrippina didn't just break this law, she rewrote it. According to Tacitus's Annals, Agrippina exploited every advantage at her disposal. She was 33 years old, beautiful, and possessed the most valuable bloodline in Rome, direct descent from Augustus. She convinced the Roman Senate to change centuries-old incest laws specifically to permit her marriage to Claudius. In AD 49, the wedding took place with imperial grandeur, but Agrippina's ambitions didn't stop at becoming empress. She immediately maneuvered Claudius into adopting her 13-year-old son, Lucius Domitius, renaming him Nero Claudius Caesar, and declaring him heir to the throne, superseding Claudius's biological son, Britannicus. 5 years later, on October 13, AD 54, Emperor Claudius died suddenly after eating a plate of mushrooms at a palace banquet. The circumstances were immediately suspicious. Ancient historians Tacitus and Suetonius both documented the rumours. The mushrooms had been prepared by Agrippina's food taster, a woman named Locusta, who was known throughout Rome as a professional poisoner. Claudius consumed the dish enthusiastically. Within hours, he was vomiting violently, suffering convulsions, unable to speak. His physician, allegedly bribed by Agrippina, inserted a feather down Claudius's throat, supposedly to induce vomiting and save him. The feather was coated with additional poison. Claudius died that night in agony. Before the Senate could even question the circumstances, before Claudius's body had grown cold, Agrippina moved with terrifying precision. She sealed the palace gates. She summoned the Praetorian Guard, and at noon on October 13th, 16-year-old Nero emerged from the palace to be proclaimed Emperor of Rome. Agrippina had achieved the impossible. She had murdered her way to the throne and installed her son as emperor. Now came the most unprecedented phase of her reign, ruling Rome herself. Archaeological evidence from the ancient city of Aphrodisias in modern-day Turkey preserves this moment in stone. A marble relief depicts Agrippina not as a dutiful mother in the background, but as the personification of Rome itself, wearing a crown, placing the imperial laurels on Nero's head. She stands taller than her son, more prominent, more powerful. Coins minted in the first year of Nero's reign tell the same shocking story. On one gold aureus, Agrippina's portrait appears on the obverse, the primary face of the coin traditionally reserved exclusively for the reigning emperor. Nero's face is relegated to the reverse side, the position of secondary importance. No woman in Roman history had ever been honoured this way. No woman ever would be again. For 5 years, Agrippina ruled alongside Nero as co-emperor in everything but name. Eyewitness accounts confirm she attended Senate meetings, seated on a separate throne beside her son. When foreign ambassadors arrived, they bowed to both emperors. Official inscriptions proclaimed Nero as son of Agrippina, placing the mother's name above the emperor's authority, a reversal of Roman traditions so radical it enraged the male political establishment. But absolute power breeds absolute paranoia, and Agrippina's control over Nero began triggering a psychological crisis in the young emperor. The historical records document the turning point with precision. Nero, now in his early 20s, fell passionately in love with a freedwoman named Acte, a former slave girl. Agrippina was furious. This woman had no political connections, no noble bloodline, low value to the empire. She confronted Nero publicly, questioned his every decision, criticized his choice of companions. According to Tacitus, Agrippina's intrusions became suffocating. She monitored Nero's daily activities, inserted herself into his private affairs, demanded explanations for his meetings and movements. The young emperor began to crack under her surveillance. Then came Poppaea Sabina, beautiful, ambitious, and married to Nero's friend Otho. Nero became obsessed with her, but Poppaea understood that as long as Agrippina lived, she could never become empress. Suetonius documents Poppaea's manipulation. She frequently complained to Nero, sometimes mocking him, calling him a child controlled by another, with no power over the empire, let alone his own freedom. Poppaea's words struck deep. Nero began to see his mother not as his greatest ally, but as his greatest obstacle. His advisors, Seneca and Burrus, reinforced this perception. They whispered that Agrippina's influence made Nero look weak, manipulated, unmanly. The accusations escalated. Salacious rumours spread throughout Rome that Agrippina was engaging in incest with her own son to maintain control over him. The historian Cluvius documented that Agrippina dressed seductively, appeared at midday when Nero was drunk and vulnerable, offered herself repeatedly with passionate kisses and sensual caresses. Were these rumours true? Probably not. But in Rome's political arena, truth mattered less than perception, and the perception was devastating to Agrippina's power. Nero began systematically stripping his mother of authority. In AD 55, documented in Tacitus's Annals, Book 13, Chapter 18, Nero removed Agrippina's Roman and German bodyguards, elite soldiers who had sworn loyalty to her personally. He expelled her from the imperial palace, forcing her into a separate residence. He cancelled her political audiences. He revoked her seat at official ceremonies. Agrippina fought back. She threatened to support Britannicus, Claudius's biological son, who still had a legitimate claim to the throne. This was Agrippina's fatal miscalculation. On February 11th, AD 55, during a palace banquet, 14-year-old Britannicus drank from his wine cup and immediately began convulsing. Witnesses watched in horror as the boy collapsed, foaming at the mouth, his body rigid with seizures. He died within minutes at Nero's feet. The official explanation: epilepsy. The reality, documented by multiple sources: poison, administered on Nero's orders. The same poison maker, Locusta, who had killed Claudius. With Britannicus eliminated, Agrippina lost her most valuable political leverage. But Nero wasn't satisfied with just neutralizing his mother's power. He wanted her dead, and he wanted her death to look like an accident. Suetonius's biography of Nero, chapter 34, documents 3 separate assassination attempts before the infamous shipwreck. Attempt 1. Poison. Nero tried to poison Agrippina at least 3 times. Each attempt failed. Agrippina, having spent decades navigating Rome's deadly politics, had taken antidotes daily, building immunity to common poisons. She survived every dose. Attempt 2. The collapsing ceiling. Nero's engineers constructed a mechanical device in Agrippina's bedroom, a ceiling panel weighted with lead, designed to fall and crush her while she slept. Someone in the conspiracy betrayed the plot. Agrippina discovered the mechanism before it could be triggered. Attempt 3. The murder ship. When poison and crushing failed, Nero turned to his freedman Anicetus, commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum. Anicetus proposed an ingenious solution: a pleasure barge with a collapsible cabin, designed to sink in the Bay of Naples. The death would appear accidental, just another tragic shipwreck. Nero loved this plan. It had theatrical flair, poetic justice. His mother would drown in the same Mediterranean waters where she had once wielded absolute power. In March of AD 59, Nero sent Agrippina a letter dripping with false affection. He invited her to Baiae, a luxurious resort town on the Bay of Naples, to celebrate the festival of Minerva. The letter spoke of reconciliation, of healing their broken relationship, of a son's love for his mother. Agrippina suspected a trap. According to Tacitus, she received warnings about Nero's intentions, but she was also a political strategist. Refusing the invitation would confirm the rift between mother and son, potentially triggering immediate assassination. Attending gave her a chance to negotiate, to regain influence, to survive. She travelled to Baiae by litter, accompanied by a small retinue of loyal servants. Nero greeted her on the shore with an elaborate performance of filial devotion. He embraced her warmly. He escorted her to his villa at Bauli, where a magnificent banquet had been prepared in her honour. For hours they talked, Nero youthfully familiar, laughing, reminiscing, discussing matters of state. Witnesses documented that Nero stared intensely into Agrippina's eyes throughout the meal. As she prepared to depart, he clung to her breast, either completing his pretense or, as Tacitus suggests, experiencing genuine emotion at seeing his mother for what might be the last time. Then Nero offered her his personal ship, elaborately decorated, manned by trusted sailors from the imperial fleet, to carry her back across the bay to her villa. Agrippina stepped aboard the murder ship. The cabin ceiling had been weighted with lead. The hull had been weakened. Roman sailors loyal to Anicetus waited for the signal. The gods provided a bright, starry night, a calm sea. As if, Tacitus wrote, nature itself wanted to bear witness to the crime about to unfold. The ship hadn't travelled far from shore when the ceiling collapsed. Lead weights crashed down onto the cabin where Agrippina reclined with her companion Acheronia. Creperius Gallus, standing near the helm, was crushed instantly, his skull shattered by the impact. But Agrippina survived. The projecting sides of her couch, built stronger than the conspirators anticipated, held firm against the weight. She was trapped, but alive. The sailors panicked. Their carefully orchestrated accident was falling apart. They tried to capsize the vessel by rushing to one side, but in the chaos, other crew members instinctively counterbalanced, lowering the ship gently into the water instead of flipping it violently. Then Acheronia made a fatal decision. In the darkness and confusion, she began screaming that she was Agrippina, demanding that the sailors rescue the emperor's mother. Perhaps she hoped to save her mistress by drawing the assassin's attention to herself. The sailors beat her to death with oars and poles, crushing her skull in the black Mediterranean waters. Agrippina understood immediately. She stayed silent, slipping into the sea through the wreckage. Despite a wound to her shoulder, she swam toward shore, eventually reaching fishing boats that carried her to the Lucrine lake and then to her villa. Now came Agrippina's most brilliant strategic move. She knew Nero had tried to kill her. She knew another attempt would come. But she also understood that revealing her knowledge would trigger immediate action. So she played ignorant. She sent her freedman Agerinus to Nero with a carefully worded message. She had survived a terrible accident by divine favour and good luck, and begged her concerned son not to visit while she recovered. Meanwhile, she treated her wound, ordered Acheronia's will to be found, and waited. At the imperial palace, Nero was spiralling into panic. He had expected confirmation of his mother's death. Instead, Agerinus arrived, announcing her survival. Nero summoned Seneca and Burrus in terror, claiming Agrippina would arm slaves, raise troops, appeal to the Senate, expose his murder attempt. According to Tacitus, both advisors fell silent. They understood that the situation had reached a point of no return. Either Nero died or Agrippina died. There was no third option. Burrus, commander of the Praetorian Guard, refused to order soldiers to murder Germanicus's daughter. The memory of Agrippina's beloved father still commanded loyalty among the troops. But Anicetus, the freedman who had designed the failed ship, volunteered to finish the job personally. Then Nero orchestrated a grotesque piece of theatre. As Agerinus delivered Agrippina's message, Nero threw a sword at the freedman's feet and ordered his arrest, claiming Agrippina had sent an assassin to kill the emperor. Now Nero had justification. Now he had his cover story. What happened next is documented in explicit detail by Tacitus in Annals Book 14, Chapter 8. It was still night when Anicetus led a detachment of Roman soldiers to Agrippina's villa. Word had already spread of the shipwreck. Crowds had gathered on the shore, carrying lamps, celebrating the empress's survival. When armed soldiers appeared, the crowd scattered in terror. Anicetus surrounded the villa with guards. They broke down the doors, dragging away servants and slaves. When they reached Agrippina's bedroom, only one slave girl remained, a small lamp providing the only light. Agrippina looked up and saw Anicetus accompanied by Herculeus, a warship captain, and Oberitus, a centurion. She understood instantly. Her final gambit had failed. The accounts of her last words vary slightly between sources, but all agree on their essential courage. "If you have come to visit me," she said calmly, "report back that I am recovered. If you are here to commit murder, I will not believe this comes from my son." The assassins surrounded her couch. Herculeus struck first, a club blow to her head. As Oberitus drew his sword, Agrippina made one final, defiant gesture. She tore open her clothing, exposed her womb and shouted, "Strike here! Strike the womb that bore Nero!" The centurion's sword plunged into her abdomen, then again and again. multiple wounds, documented by witnesses who later examined her body. The most powerful woman in Roman history bled to death on her bedroom floor, murdered by soldiers of the empire she had ruled. She was 43 years old. Suetonius documents the aftermath with disturbing precision. Credible sources reported that Nero couldn't wait to see his mother's corpse. He held her lifts, examined her body, criticized some features, and praised others. Being thirsty during this inspection, he paused to have drinks brought. Agrippina was cremated that same night on a dining couch. No state funeral, no imperial honours, no acknowledgement of her rank. As long as Nero remained emperor, her burial site remained unmarked, her grave untended. But Nero could never escape what he had done. Ancient sources document that he suffered psychological torment for the rest of his life. He claimed to see his mother's ghost, to hear trumpets from the surrounding hills, to be pursued by furies with whips and burning torches. He hired Persian magi to perform ceremonies, calling up Agrippina's spirit to beg forgiveness. During his tour of Greece, he refused to participate in the Eleusinian mysteries because heralds announced that the sinful must be removed from initiation rites. The Roman Senate, spineless and terrified, voted thanks and sacrifices celebrating Agrippina's death. They declared her birthday an unlucky day. Only Senator Thrasea Paetus walked out in silent protest, an act of courage that would later cost him his life. Agrippina's death sent a clear message to every woman in Rome. This is what happens when you claim power equal to men. This is the price of ambition. This is the fate of women who refuse to remain in the shadows. But here's what Rome's male historians never wanted to admit. Agrippina the Younger fundamentally changed the Roman Empire. She proved that a woman could rule as effectively as any emperor. She broke every barrier, shattered every constraint, and climbed to absolute power in a system designed to keep her powerless. Yes, she schemed. Yes, she possibly murdered. But so did every male emperor in Roman history. The difference was that Agrippina had to fight twice as hard, manipulate twice as cleverly, and survive twice as long to achieve the same power that men inherited by birthright. 9 years after Agrippina's assassination, Nero's reign collapsed in civil war. He committed suicide in AD 68, allegedly crying out, "What an artist the world loses in me." The Julio-Claudian dynasty ended in blood and chaos, exactly as Agrippina's Chaldean astrologers had predicted decades earlier. But Agrippina left one permanent mark on history. On the banks of the Rhine, at the site of her birth, stands the city she founded and named after herself, Colonia Claudia Ara Agrippinensium. Today, over 2,000 years later, that city still thrives, known to the modern world as Cologne, Germany. So here's the question that echoes across 2 millennia. Was Agrippina the Younger a monster or a visionary? A murderous schemer or a brilliant strategist doing whatever was necessary to survive in a world that wanted her dead? History, written by men, branded her a villain. But perhaps the real crime wasn't her ambition. Perhaps the real crime was a society so threatened by a powerful woman that it required Roman soldiers to brutally destroy her. If this story revealed a side of Roman history you've never heard before, subscribe to this channel. Because next time, we're uncovering the truth about another Roman empress whose story has been buried for centuries. And what they did to her was even worse. Remember Agrippina's final words, "Strike the womb that bore Nero." Even in death, she challenged her killers to confront exactly what they were destroying. Not just a woman, but the very source of imperial power itself. That's the real reason they wanted her erased from history. She reminded them of something terrifying, that power has no gender, only consequences.